In our society today, we're beset with quite a wide variety, a wide number of problems. But there is a problem that is central to so many of the other problems that are taking place in our society and that are impacting our society. And that fundamental problem is the breakdown, the dissolution of the family unit. The family unit is the most fundamental building block of every society. It's the starting point because, no chain can be any stronger than its weakest link. The weakest link of the chain is the one, no matter how strong all the other links are, when you pull, the weak link will break. And our families are a very vital building block. They are the basis of the structure of our community and our societies. The family, human family, is not simply something that man has evolved or developed. The human family is of divine origin. God designed and created and established the human family. Animals reproduce, but animals don't marry and establish families. I know that certain animals, there are a handful, birds and a few birds and others that mate for lengthy periods of time or mate for life. But they don't establish a true family relationship. It's not something that extends for generations back and forth. I have a cat a number of years ago. She had kittens. I solved that problem shortly thereafter, but she hasn't had any more since. But anyway, she had one litter, and I gave them away. And one of them I gave to my brother. And his has survived, and he still has it. And from time to time over the years, when we have traveled up there, when we were going to be gone for a period of time, I have on more than one occasion had my cat along. Well, there was no particular enthusiasm of any great family reunion between mother and daughter reunited. They were just two cats, and there wasn't some great family connection there. The mother cat, when the little kitten was born, well, sure, she nursed it and took care of it in the way that God has built into them to do. But there's not a concept of family. There's not a relationship there. It's not some recognition and awareness of a relationship that exists. Simply doesn't exist. The concept of family, as we understand it, is something that is unique in the created world to human beings. Animals don't have families. Animals don't marry and establish families. The angels don't marry. But God established the family unit for human beings. He established a family relationship. And that is the basis of every other relationship. It's the starting point. It's the place where our children learn how to relate to a world that's bigger than they themselves. It is the basis of how we learn to relate and connect with the world around us. The family is of divine origin. And the problems that we are experiencing in our nation, and many of these things that are prophesied, directly tie in with the breakdown, the dissolution of the family. We find back in Jeremiah chapter 5 and verse 7, God says, "How shall I pardon you for this? Your children have forsaken me and sworn by them that are no gods. When I had fed them to the full, they then committed adultery and assembled themselves by troops in the harlots' houses. They were as fed horses in the morning. Everyone neighed after his neighbor's wife." So here was an attitude of immorality. An attitude that is displayed here, that the more material prosperity there has been, the less conscious thought there has been of God. Morality, of course, is the guardian of the family. That's what gives the family a unique, special identity that guards the family and makes a family relationship different. And so here God describes that sort of an attitude, and we see right here the description of the loose morality, the attitude, the casual approach toward morality that besets our nation and certainly besets many people, certainly many men in our society. Back in Isaiah chapter 3, we find that there's some indictment in terms of some of the rest, the components of society, in terms of children, in terms of women. I might just mention in terms of Jeremiah 5 that this is very directly related as a prophecy for the end time, because it comes on down in verse 11 of Jeremiah 5, and it says, "For the house of Israel and the house of Judah have dealt very treacherously." So God is showing two distinct groups, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And then in verse 15 of Jeremiah 5, he says, "Lo, I will bring a nation upon you from afar, O house of Israel." So here is something that is directed in the context, these indictments about the immorality that are undermining and destroying the integrity of the family unit. This is specifically in the context of a prophecy to the house of Israel. Made clear in verse 11 that the house of Judah and the house of Israel are two distinct groups. When Jeremiah was writing this, the house of Israel had been in captivity for over 100 years. The house of Judah was on the verge of going into captivity. So it was not simply a warning for his time and his day. It was a warning that had primary implication for the end time. Now, as we look in Isaiah chapter 3, in verse 4, he says, "I'll give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. The people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable." He says, the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, every one by his neighbor. We live in a land that is just filled with violence. You wouldn't dare just leave your door unlocked or walk down the street late at night in so many areas. He describes the fact of people being oppressed. What is described here is sort of a law of the jungle mentality. You know what the law of the jungle is? The law of the jungle is the big animals eat the little animals. Those that are the strongest, the biggest, the most powerful, the swiftest, that have the sharpest teeth and the sharpest claws, make prey of those that are weaker and those that are slower. And so the very strong make a prey of the very weak. That's the law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest. That's not the way God intended human beings to live. The only way that human beings will live any different is when there is a bond of sentiment, there is a respect, a certain bond of sentiment that ties people together in a fabric of community, in a sense of relationship with one another. You know, among the wild animals, who is made a prey? Well, the most vulnerable are the very old and the very young. They tend to be more slow. They tend to be able to fight off the predators less, and so the primary prey of the predators tends to be those who are the very old or the very young. And you know, that's what happens. That's what is happening increasingly in our society. Those who are least able to defend themselves are made a prey for human predators. That is the result of a breakdown of the family. Because where is it that people learn that there is first established a bond of sentiment that ties one another, that ties people together, not simply as a matter of legal contractual obligation, but a bond of sentiment, of respect? Well, we see that on down in a little later in verse 12. He says, "As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. "O my people, they which lead you cause you to err and destroy the way of your paths." Coming on down in verse 16, he says, "Moreover, the Lord says, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet," describes, this sort of an attitude, this sort of a haughty, proud, glamour girl type of an approach. And you can just go on down and read the rest of it. It talks about the things that are going to come. That attitude is going to be humbled. So whether you're looking at the men, whether you're looking at the young people, whether you're looking at the women, every element of society, there is an aspect that is indicted right here in Isaiah and in Jeremiah. Because these are all attitudes on the part of various segments that undermine the integrity of the family. Now, we live in a society where this is simply the way it is. We're surrounded with it, and we're all influenced by it to one degree or another. I would like for us to spend the remaining portion of the sermon in examining three vital keys to building and strengthening strong, healthy families. God places great emphasis on the family, and yet we live in a society where the family is coming apart, and as a direct result of the families coming apart, society is coming apart. We live in a society that is increasingly violence-ridden, crime-ridden, permeated with a lack of respect, a lack of sentiment, proper relationship with one another, because the families are falling apart. Well, there are many different things that we could go into. Obviously, it's a broad subject. There are a lot more than just three things. But I want to focus in on what I feel are three very important keys that are at the heart and core of strengthening and building healthy families. Simply put, they involve a recognition of the necessity to care, to commit, and to communicate. To care, to commit, and to communicate. Now let's look at them one by one. What do we mean to care? The word care, or caring, or careful, the word care or caring is used a few times in the New Testament, several times. Everywhere that it is used, it all comes from the same root term, which has a connotation of being concerned about. To care is just that. It is to be concerned about. Let's notice the way in which this is used, and let's understand some things about it. In 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7, we read about our relationship with God. And we're told here in 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your cares upon Him, for He cares for you. The very essence of the nature of God is love. God is love. Real love is outgoing concern. It's not a selfish, incoming lust. It's an outgoing concern. It is a concern for others. And this aspect of really caring, of having a proper concern, we're told here that we can cast all of our concerns, all of our cares, all of our concerns, we can put on God because He cares for us. So the essence of love, real love, is a giving, caring relationship. The word love is used in so many different ways in our society, and so many times when people talk about love, they are talking about lust, or they're talking about a passionate emotion. Now, marital love ought to involve certain passion, and that's not wrong. But if that's all there is to it, it will be very short-lived. If the essence is not a genuine caring, a genuine outgoing concern. And that, of course, is the attitude that God has for us. an outgoing concern. Let's go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and let's notice something else that the Apostle Paul reveals in terms of a proper understanding of this concept, what it means to care. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 24. Now here Paul is describing a relationship. He's describing an analogy of the human body and comparing it to the church. Now, our body consists of many members. There are many components that all collectively are one human body. We've got 2 eyes, we've got 2 ears, we've got a mouth, we've got a nose, we've got fingers and toes and feet and arms and hands, and there are various components, various members of the body. Some are a little more impressive and some are less so. Some we consider to be particularly attractive and others we consider, not particularly so. I don't guess there's any more feeble or insignificant member of the body than the little toe. I've never known of anybody that considered the little toe, a particularly attractive member of the body. That just, it's really, really his good feature, is his little toe. I've never thought of it as particularly attractive. I don't know that you ever think of it as particularly necessary or important. We think of the eyes, now that's important, and the ears, those are important, and the mouth, that's important, the hands, that's important. About the little toe. We don't usually think of the little toe as being all that important. It's not all that impressive looking. It's not a particularly significant member of the body. In fact, that's probably about as insignificant a member of the body as there is. Have you ever gotten up in the middle of the night, maybe to go to the bathroom or to get a drink of water, and stubbed your little toe? You know what? As insignificant a member of the body as the little toe is, when you stubbed it, the whole body felt it. The whole body hurt. Now, that's the analogy Paul is using here. He says, look, we're all part of the same body. Some parts of the body you may say, well, that's not a real important part of the body. Every part of the body is important. In verse 25, he says that there should be no schism or division in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. Whether one member suffers, all the members suffer with it, or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. Now he says that the members should all have the same care one of another. We're all members. We have a body that is comprised of members, and he talks about from a spiritual standpoint that we are members of the body should all have the same care one for another. There should be that concern, that outgoing concern, that all should share for one another, and it reflects itself that if one member suffers, all the members suffer. If one member is honored, then all the members are honored. In other words, we take it personally. If you stub your little toe, the rest of your body takes it personally. It affects the way you feel all over when one member of the body hurts. The rest of the body doesn't say, well, what's that to me? I don't care. That's not my part. There is a recognition, because the body, of course, the various members of the body don't have a mind that they can think and independently choose. There is a relationship that is tied together through the nerves and the muscles in our body, that when one portion of our body is affected, the whole body is affected. Now, we are all individuals and we have minds and we can think and act, but we need the recognition that the same thing holds true. The exact same thing holds true. When one member suffers, if we have the same care one for another, there is a genuine concern that we feel for one another, that is the basis of our relationship, whether it's our relationship in the church as brothers and sisters with one another, or whether it's our relationship in the family. That there is a care, there is an outgoing concern. See, love is not just a sentiment or an emotion. It's not just sort of an emotional feeling, oh yes, I have love for everybody. Real love involves a genuine caring about someone else. And if you really care, then you take it personally what happens. Now, some people do take it personally what happens. If something good happens to somebody else, they take it personally. They say, that dirty so-and-so, he didn't deserve that. I should have had that. I don't see how come he got that. Oh, I worked a lot harder than he did. I think I deserved it a lot more than he did. Now, that's not the kind of person taking it personally that I have reference to. You know, if we really genuinely care about one another, there is that real outgoing concern for one another. Then if somebody is hurt, if somebody is suffering, if somebody is in pain, if somebody has lost a job, if somebody is going through a real low point, a real trial, we take it personally. We have a sense of empathy, of being able to put ourselves in that person's place. It matters to us. We're not indifferent to the feelings of others. If you care about someone, you're not indifferent to their feelings. You care. In the same way, if someone is advanced, they get a promotion, they get a raise, they receive some honor, some recognition, some reward, you're happy for them. You take it personally in a positive way, that you're glad to see them advance. You see, there's no room for jealousy and envy in that sort of relationship. That happens in families. It happens in a lot of situations where there is a spirit of jealousy and envy. Somebody sees someone else sort of getting a little bit ahead or getting advanced. They resent that. Well, Paul addressed it back in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, in verse 19. He talked about that and what a rare commodity it is. Genuine caring. Real, proper, outgoing concern. First, in Philippians 2:19, he says, I trust in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy shortly unto you, that I also may be of good comfort when I know your state. For I have no man like-minded who will naturally care for your state. For all seek their own, not the things which are Jesus Christ. Paul was evidently a little bit disturbed or disgusted with the attitude that certain ones had evidenced. A selfish attitude, an attitude of sort of what's in it for me and looking out for their own convenience and their own advantage. He says all seek their own. They're looking out for themselves and their convenience and what's to their advantage and not looking out for the work of God. But he said Timothy's not like that, and I can send Timothy to you. Timothy is like-minded with me, and I know that I will be able to get a good feel for what's going on down there because Timothy will naturally care for your state. It is important to him how you're feeling and what's happening and what's going on and the condition and the circumstance in which you find yourself. He will naturally care for you. He has that genuine concern, which means that he's not simply thinking of himself. You see, the essence of really caring is not having a self-centered, selfish, self-focused, I'm looking out for me, and I'm going to take care of me regardless of what happens to you. There's no way that sort of relationship can build a family. That sort of selfish, envious approach. Notice on back in just here earlier in the chapter in Philippians 2, up in verse 3, he says, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Again, he contrasts two totally different approaches. One is an approach of strife, of vainglory. Individual who is trying to look good, who's trying to advance the self, who is jealous, ready to strive, and jockey for position and try to maneuver and manipulate, trying to advance himself, as opposed to someone who exemplifies the mind of Christ, not looking simply on his own things, but on the things of others, which is a matter of genuinely caring. One of the most important aspects of character focuses on this area. A genuine empathy, which means the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Trying to understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end. You know, if we really grasp that, if we really had that sort of an attitude, it would resolve itself. It would resolve a lot of problems. Resolve a lot of problems in families that come from a lack of genuine care that some evidence toward others. Of not thinking about what would it be like. How would you like to have to live with you? You know, think about it. How would you like to have to live with you? You know, your mate does. We just naturally and humanly aren't always real caring. It comes easily to sort of look out for ourselves and to think about sort of covering our own bases and protecting the self. Now, caring doesn't mean having a genuine concern, a genuine empathy for others. Doesn't mean being indulgent and permissive and taking everybody else's responsibility and not doing what we need to do in a right way. You know, that sort of indulgence and permissiveness is not genuine caring and love. We're told that in Proverbs 13:24. In Proverbs 13:24, we're told, "He that spares his rod hates his son, but he that loves him chastens him early." So God says if you really genuinely love your child, you will discipline that child. You will give them training and teaching and discipline. You're not just going to let them sort of grow up wild like a weed. If you care, you will care enough to set limits and to set boundaries, to give proper discipline. That is a part of caring. You care what happens. So if we care for someone, that doesn't mean that we just simply indulge every whim, regardless of what it is, and we totally take someone else's responsibility and do it all for them, because that's not really helping them in the long run. But there are times that we have to be willing to totally inconvenience ourselves because there is a genuine need. You know, if you have a sick child, the child is up and they're sick through the night, it's inconvenient to stay up. You get tired. You wind up maybe having to sacrifice sleep. But because you care, there is a willingness to sacrifice because there is a need to sacrifice. And obviously, we have to recognize what the appropriate boundaries and limits are on various things in terms of obviously sometimes people who will take advantage or misuse something in a wrong way, but there needs to be, at the basis of our relationships in our families, there's got to be genuine caring. Because that's the essence of what real love is all about. It's an outgoing concern. It is a genuine concern for the other person, for their feelings and their needs. motivated because you care. A society held together on the basis of a bond of respect and of the bonds of sentiment, as opposed simply to legal contractual obligations. We live in a society where everybody is so concerned about their rights. They want to make sure that nobody else gets anything from them that they're not absolutely obligated to give. And the whole court system is just bogging down because of litigation. People suing one another because they don't want to follow through and to do, and because they don't care. They're not really concerned. They don't put themselves in the part of the other person. So there is a lack of caring, and there's also a lack of commitment, which we'll get to in just a moment. Let's notice one other scripture here before we move on, back in Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 33. It says, "Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband." Now here's an aspect of caring, and it's broken down in a very specific way. He says, "Husbands, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself." Now, why does it say that? Well, the tendency for men sometimes is to feel like, well, our wives are there to serve us and to do things for us, and they're sort of there for our convenience. And if we're not careful, we don't put ourselves in their shoes and sort of look at it through their eyes. And that's why it says, "Let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself." Think about it. If the shoe were on the other foot, how would you like to be treated the way you are treating? See, if you genuinely care, if you care about your mate, if you as a husband care about your wife, then put yourself in her shoes in your mind. That's a part of caring. The way you love her in a genuine, outgoing way is you put yourself in her shoes and you treat her as you would wish to be treated under similar circumstances, with the proper respect and with the proper consideration of her needs and her feelings. And the wife, see that she reverence her husband, that she properly respect and esteem him. If she really cares for him and she really puts herself in his shoes, then she's going to think about how she would feel in that circumstance. And to show a proper respect, a proper consideration for his feelings, and a proper deference to him and to his needs and to his feelings. There is a genuine caring, a genuine outgoing concern that is at the basis of the relationship. The second aspect has to do with commitment. To care is a vital key to building a strong, healthy family. Commitment is the second key. Commitment, loyalty. Notice back in Malachi chapter 2. Malachi chapter 2. Here are the context of dealing with individuals who were going through the form of religion, and yet their attitude was not, their conduct was not reflective of what God expected. And in verse 14 of Malachi 2, "Yet you say, wherefore? Because the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, yet is she your companion and the wife of your covenant." So here we're told that marriage involves a covenant relationship. A covenant relationship. Wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously. You've dealt deceitfully. It has to do here, it's addressing the case of a husband that is unfaithful, that wants to get rid of his wife and sort of move on to someone else. And God indicts that attitude. And he says that the Lord is witness between you and the wife of your youth. You've dealt treacherously. You've been deceitful. She's the wife of your covenant. There is a lack of loyalty, a lack of commitment. Verse 15. Did not He, speaking of God, did not God make one? These twain shall be one flesh, God said of Adam and Eve, of man and woman. Did not He make one? And here's sort of a parenthetical statement that's stuck in. It's a little ambiguously worded in the King James. Some other translations, I think the Amplified probably brings it out about as well as any. The sense of it is, yet he, the man, was high-spirited and said, why one? Wherefore one? The answer, then, is that he, God, might seek a godly seed. Let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. Take heed to your spirit. Control yourself. Don't say, well, I've got all these needs and all these desires, and I don't see why I ought to be restricted here in just one. God says yes. There is a reason as to why one, that he might seek a godly seed. God is concerned about the next generation. He's concerned about the way that children grow up. Take heed to your spirit. Don't deal treacherously. Don't deal deceitfully with the wife of your youth. For the Lord, the God of Israel, says that He hates putting away. One covers violence with his garment, says the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit and deal not treacherously. A matter of being disloyal to a covenant, to an agreement. A lack of commitment. Someone has made a commitment, but they don't want to follow it through. Our society is permeated with this attitude. People don't want to do what they're not forced to do. Again, our civil courts are just clogged with litigation, people suing one another, generally because they don't want to follow through on a contract. It may involve divorce. It may involve that's a civil suit. It may involve insurance problems, but ultimately it boils down that people agreed to something, and somewhere along the line it became inconvenient, and they didn't want to be bothered. And so they began to look for a way to get out of what they had said they would do. They didn't want to do it anymore. Their yea really didn't mean yea. They trying to get out of it. There is a lack of commitment. And it's addressed here in the context of marriage. It could have worked both ways. A wife could deal with her husband that way, or a husband could deal with his wife that way. Here in this circumstance, it was a problem of men dealing with their wives. Dealing in a treacherous way. So, there is a covenant relationship that exists. God established the family. He established that covenant relationship, that special one, that He might seek a godly seed. The family, that's where the next generation will be shaped and molded. That's where the next generation will be shaped and molded and influenced. God wants to see every generation of young people get the best possible start. Family is very important. We see that one of the problems, the just skyrocketing juvenile crime rate in this nation, and the rate of violent crime among young people, is something that is just absolutely rising astronomically. There is not a godly seed in so many cases because the families have crumbled and disintegrated, and illegitimacy is skyrocketing, and children are growing up without that proper shaping, that proper direction, that sense of security that comes from a loving, committed family relationship. There's got to be commitment. Commitment to God, commitment to God's ways and to God's values, commitment of mates to one another, commitment of the family, commitment of parents to children. A sense of commitment, a sense of loyalty. It's important that we recognize that the essence of what separates marriage from simply a temporary casual relationship, otherwise known as fornication or adultery, the essence of what separates the two is a commitment that exists between two people who really mean it. Very tragic situations where one means it and the other doesn't. Very sad, very tragic. Commitment is a vital key to building strong families. Because if there's not a sense of loyalty, if there's not a sense of commitment, there's no real basis of a relationship over a period of time, whether it's in terms of parents and children or whether it's in terms of mates. And ultimately, our commitment has got to be to God, and it's got to be to God's way of life, because that's our whole value system. And if that's there, then it will carry through in terms of our commitment to other people. To care, to commit, and then to communicate. Now, the first two of these, caring and committing, both of these involve fundamental aspects of character. Because it takes character to build and to maintain strong, healthy families. We could say that the essence of character boils down to two elements. One is what we could term as empathy or outgoing concern, the ability to consider the needs of others. You know, that doesn't just come naturally. It takes character we have to develop that sort of character that has an outgoing concern, that really genuinely considers the needs, the wants, the feelings, the desires of others. That takes character. And that's what caring is all about. That's what empathy is all about. Another aspect of character has to do with the fact that character involves not only the ability to reach out beyond ourselves and to consider the needs of others, to have that empathy, that caring and concern for others, but it also involves the ability of what the Scripture calls temperance or self-control, the ability to defer gratification for the moment for a long-term result, a long-term benefit, a long-term thing that is of value, taking a long-term view, not simply acting on impulse, the ability to say no to the impulsive whims of the moment. That's a vital role of character. And if you look, of course, at the breakdown of a character in our society reflected with all the crime, with all of the whole gamut of immorality and crime, you're looking at an absence of those two things. One is an absence of the ability to really consider the feelings and the needs of others. See, it's selfish, it's incoming, it's a lack of the ability to really put yourself in someone else's place. You could never have, how could you have violence? How could you have somebody out raping and robbing and pillaging and doing violence and stealing? How could you have that if they put themselves in the place of the other person? They thought about how would it feel to be on the other side of that? How would it feel to be on the receiving end? How would I like someone to treat me that way? Well, you see, that's part of what sets human beings apart from animals. Here is the ability to have that genuine caring, that outgoing concern. You couldn't have crime and violence if people would do that. And the other aspect is the self-control, the saying no to the self, the postponing of short-term, instant gratification for long-term results. That takes character, to say no to the self. And see, that's what commitment is all about. Not just giving in to every whim, every impulse that sort of comes along. Well, feels good, do it. No commitment, no loyalty on something like that. It's a matter of recognizing a sense of obligation, a sense of long-term, consider the consequences, consider the results, consider the impact. Commitment. Caring and commitment involve crucial areas of character that lie at the basis of a family relationship if it's going to be healthy. You can't have trust if you don't have commitment. If a person's word doesn't mean anything, if there's no loyalty, how can you have trust? And how can you have any sort of healthy relationship if people don't trust each other? Well, you can have all sorts of prenuptial agreements, and you can have, lawyers by the score, filling out thousands of pages of documentation in triplicate. There's no relationship. People don't trust one another. For every agreement that one lawyer can figure out, another one can come along and figure out how to break. If the only thing holding people together is a contractual relationship, and there's not a genuine sense of caring and of commitment that originates in the heart and in the mind, that you intend to be loyal. Let's notice what is the very opposite of good communication, and let's notice the reason that lies at the root of it. Romans 3:13. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. On down in verse 16 it says, destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. A person like this certainly is not going to know the way of peace. They're not going to have peace in their home. They're not going to have peace in their family. They're not going to have peace with anyone. Destruction and misery are in their ways because their mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. How can you be pouring out that sort of vile invective and that sort of destructive comment, that sort of negative, put down, cursing, bitter, accusative, hostile type of language? How can you pour that out and not produce misery and destruction? It simply can't exist. Now, some of this can come out in more subtle forms. We don't always have to just come right out in the most plain and vile and crude language. Sometimes the bitterness, the resentment, the anger, the hostility comes out in more subtle ways. It may come out in forms of sarcasm and put down. It may come out in sort of innuendo and implying things. We can do that. And not really say it, but just sort of get the point across. Somebody says, well, how's so-and-so? Well, says he's sick. Hey, you didn't say that he wasn't, right? But you certainly implied that there's more to the story. You can imply all sorts of things. Why? Well, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of implying things of that sort? What about sarcasm? Sarcasm has an interesting root if you look it up. The Greek word for flesh is sarx. And the ending, the asm ending, has to do with a tearing or ripping. It means literally a ripping of the flesh. It's sort of interesting because, that's what sarcasm does. It rips somebody apart. We've all been on the receiving end sometimes of somebody that really has a sharp, sarcastic tongue. Now, there may not be blood dripping on the floor that everybody around us can see, but the wounds are there and they're real. They're there. They're real. I mean, might as well just sort of shredded us. Well, what's the point of that? Why do people engage in sarcasm, in put-downs? Well, that's somewhere along the line. It's as though they're trying to elevate themselves by putting somebody else down. And where do these attitudes come from? Because this way of speaking, the communication starts from the heart. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. You see, ultimately, the solution to the problem doesn't involve simply putting a governor on the mouth. Well, I'll grant in some circumstances that would be a start. But it has to go deeper than that. If we don't get down to the heart that's full of anger and resentment and hostility, then sooner or later some of it's just going to spill out because we get up to the brim and just, you open your mouth and just sort of spills. It just sort of spills. If you put tape over the mouth and it couldn't come out, it'd shine out your eyes, So the real key is it's got to change something on the inside. Because if we don't, it's going to come out. And it has its impact. There's a little cartoon in the paper in the Baton Rouge paper this morning, and it showed two little ants there on the anthill. One ant is like the father and son, and one had the report card and he's looking at it and he says, five F's and a D. How did you manage that? And the ant looked up and said, well, he says, I think it was low self-esteem. And the other ant looked at him and said, why, you lousy bum, who told you that? Now, there's sort of a double aspect of it. Obviously, we can use things as excuses and cop-outs to not take responsibility for what we've done or didn't do. But we also communicate and we send messages. And we do affect. We create an atmosphere. Our style of communication in our family creates an atmosphere that permeates the family. And it can be an atmosphere where caring and commitment thrive. They thrive and they grow. It's like a plant in a healthy soil. And it puts out new growth and new leaves. And it grows and it becomes lush and full. Or a plant can be in barren soil. Soil with very few nutrients and not enough water. And it's got a few little scraggly leaves sort of hanging on. And it's a pretty spindly looking little thing. It looks sick. And it is. It's not thriving. Caring and commitment cannot thrive and grow in an atmosphere where the level of communication is reflective of bitterness and resentment and hostility and anger. Now let's go on. Let's look a little further. In Colossians chapter 4, Colossians 4 and verse 6. It says, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. That's just quite a contrast to the other. Or just poisonous invective was spilling out the mouth, bitterness and resentment was spilling out. Here it says, let your speech be gracious. Let it be with grace, seasoned with salt. You know, salt brings out the flavor. A little bit of salt can enhance the flavor and give a flavor to something that would otherwise be sort of bland and tasteless. In ancient times, the primary use of salt was as a preserving agent. Back before the times of refrigeration, salt creates an environment where bacteria can't live, and so it was used as a preserving agent. A lot of food was salted to be preserved over a period of time. And, you know, we can use it that way today. A lot of times people start feeling a sore throat or something coming on. You take salt water and gargle. Well, what does that do? Well, the salt, of course, has creates an environment that most bacteria can't live in. They don't thrive in salt. So salt was an important preservative agent. So when it says, let your speech be seasoned with salt, it's describing not only something that has flavor, has a little bit of zest, but something that has an enduring quality to it, something that is characterized by purity, something that will last, because the contaminating aspects have been destroyed, have been killed. Let's notice on over in Ephesians chapter 4. See, how do you do this? How do you go from what we find in Romans 3 to what we find in Colossians 4? What's the difference between a speech, between communication that is highlighted by grace and flavor? Something that's gracious, that's pleasant. You know, we live in a culture that it seems like speech is increasingly rude and crude and vulgar. And a certain gracious quality is increasingly lost. People are too busy. They're in too much of a hurry. And there is something that is lost. Well, it tells how you make the transition. What's the difference between the two? Let's notice in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 23. It says, be renewed in the spirit of your mind, that you put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness, wherefore putting away lying. Speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we're members one of another. There's no room for deceit. Be you angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath, neither give place to the devil. How do you be angry and not sin? Well, it says right here, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Don't hold a grudge. Don't become bitter and resentful. Sometimes the reason we hold on to the resentment and the hostility, we feel entitled to it. You know, it's as though, well, he deserves it. She deserves it. What he did, what she did, I'm entitled to feel this way. Now, the problem, of course, several problems, one of which is you have to live with your feelings. If you're feeling bitter and resentful and hostile, you're the one that has to live with that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Other people can get away. They can leave. They can go somewhere else. But you can't get away from yourself. It says, be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath, neither give place to the devil. Coming on down in verse 29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, of building up, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. It may be something that is kind and gracious and may help them promote that sort of an attitude. Verse 31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be you kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you. How do you get rid of the evil speaking? Well, you've got to first get rid of the bitterness, the wrath, the anger, the clamor. You see, the bitterness and the anger has got to be rooted out. How do you root out the bitterness and the anger? By replacing it with a kind, tender-hearted, forgiving approach. See, we have to move from retaliation to forgiveness. Do you think God sits up there and He's looking at us, says God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you? You know, we need to forgive one another, be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. I think God sort of sits up there and He's got His lightning bolt back and He's ready to strike. He says, one more time. Just let Him do it one more time and I'm going to let fly. He's just sitting there, just waiting. You know, He's been keeping count and now it's one more time. Well, I think that if that were the approach that God took, most of us would have run out of times a long time ago. How many times have you had to go to God and ask for forgiveness since you were baptized? Once? Twice? 7 times? 7 times 7? Oh, you and I lost count a long time ago. Long time ago. We want God to have that sort of forgiving attitude to us. But you know what? We have to work on having that sort of an attitude. The only way you're going to get rid of the bitterness and the anger is to replace it with an attitude of tender-hearted forgiveness. Kindness, tender-hearted, forgiving. You see, ultimately, the only way we're going to replace the wrong kind of communication with the right kind is the change has to start on the inside. Because ultimately, it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. And if there's not a change that takes place on the inside, if there's a hostility and a resentment and an anger that just stays up to here, something is going to come along and it's going to spill out from time to time. We have to put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness, we've got to be renewed in the spirit of our mind. And it will reflect itself in what comes out. The sarcasm, the put-downs, oh, they may be a little more subtle than cursing and bitterness, but they hurt. And they reflect the same things on the inside. We just maybe have learned how to sort of control it and to present it in a little more socially acceptable fashion, but it still reflects a problem on the inside. It's not something that contributes to a healthy climate in which caring and commitment grow and thrive. We've got to concentrate on communications if we want to create a healthy environment where the caring and the commitment can grow and thrive. And that's parents and children, that's husbands and wives, that's in all human relationships. Let's notice in James 3. Talks here in James 3, the whole chapter pretty well focuses in on the tongue, and it talks about all the things that the tongue can do. And verse 5 of James 3, it says, the tongue is a little member, boasts great things. Behold how great a matter a little fire kindles. And it talks about, as we come on down, verse 10, out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. Does a fountain send forth out of the same place sweet water and bitter? You know, the trees bear different sorts of fruit. Does a fig tree bring forth olives? In verse 13, who is the wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conduct his works with meekness of wisdom. And if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, lie not against the truth. Bitter envying and strife in your hearts, this is a wisdom that descends not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. Where envying and strife is, there's confusion and every evil work. The wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. The fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. See, there is a peaceful relationship that exists. Something that focuses in on building up, on promoting, and encouraging. Something that's positive, that's gracious. How many times and how unpleasant it is to be around a husband and wife who tear one another down, make disparaging comments. And we've, I'm sure, all been in situations like that. It's sort of awkward and embarrassing. It's not right, not good. How does it make someone feel to be torn down, to sort of be put down, have their flaws or their mistakes sort of trumpeted to everyone? You know, to be branded as some sort of a klutz, some sort of a thoughtless, unintelligent, incapable individual. None of us want to be branded that way. And when those sorts of things are said, it tears away. It tears down. You know, of all people, there ought to be a desire to build up. I'm not talking about insincere flattery, but I'm talking about a right building up of our mate. You know, it talks about that in Proverbs 31. Just notice very briefly. In Proverbs 31, in verse 28, it says here of the virtuous woman, her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. He builds her up. He's got positive things to say. He focuses in on her positive attributes, on her strengths. Doesn't make disparaging comments and sort of put downs. None of us like to be the butt of a joke. Well, sometimes you may stand there and you may even laugh a little bit, but it's just because you feel awkward and on the spot. That's not a very enjoyable thing, to be the butt of the joke, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman. None of us wants to be sort of held up to public ridicule and put down. Oh, it was all in fun. Fun for whom? Was it fun for the person that was the butt of the joke? Fun for the one that was sort of made fun of and everybody was laughing? Wasn't fun for the person on the receiving end. I don't think any of us would feel like we were just having a ball of fun. You know, come on, let me have some more fun. We can get locked into those things, and all three of these tie in together. And when you begin to tear down one, you tear down the basis of the others. The caring, the commitment, and the communication all have to be tied together. Communication produces an environment in which the others can grow, but if there's not genuine caring, then the rest of it's play acting. If there's no commitment, then there's no basis of sticking to anything. Peter tells us in 1 Peter chapter 3, familiar scripture, 1 Peter 3, verse 7, likewise you husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, the one who is more fragile, more sensitive. Dwell with her according to knowledge. Be conscious of that. As being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Finally, be you all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren. Be pitiful, full of pity. Be courteous, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but counterwise blessing, knowing thereunto were you called that you should inherit a blessing. For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good, and let him seek peace and ensue it. You know, if you want to love life and you want to see good days, then this is pretty important. Refrain your lips from evil. Don't be speaking deceit. Seek peace. The family units in this nation are being ripped asunder. They're rotting and decaying. We live in a society where the whole fabric of the society is disintegrating and coming apart. It's reflected in the crime that besets our nation. It's reflected in so many of the social problems that reflect the breakdown, the collapse of a civilization. And so much of it gets back to the family. We live in a society that is that way. And we have to focus in our lives and in our attention on three very important things that we can apply in our families. Three keys that are essential to stable, healthy, strong families. Caring, committing, and communicating. Those are vital elements for a family to thrive, to be healthy, and to grow. And as we focus in those areas, even though the society around us has thrown so much of this to the winds, we can take and apply and reap the benefits of a godly approach to strengthening and building healthy families.